Hi guys, this is Shannon from Reptile Way. Today we're going to be joined by Patch, and this video is going to be all about how to actually handle a snake. And generally people get these guys as pets and forget to answer that simple question before they do get a snake. So we're going to go over everything you need to know, little tips and tricks. So let's dive straight into this video. Now, an important thing to remember is that when a snake has certain actions, there's a reason for those actions. So they're not out there to hurt you. As Emily from Snake Discovery put it, there's no such thing as an aggressive snake, just a defensive snake. So think about it, when you're getting these guys as a pet for the first time, those first couple of weeks, they're just gonna see you as a potential predator. You know, they don't know any better, so they'll see you as a potential threat. So it is going to take time, it is going to take patience for them to stop seeing you as a threat. But it's really important to make sure your handling is done correctly, and it'll help sort of smooth that process out. And then eventually those sort of somewhat negative behaviours, defensive behaviours, will slowly start to subside a little bit, and it'll be a lot easier to handle and interact with your snake. Now, when it comes to actually handling your snake, there's a few little golden rules that are very, very important to remember. So one of the first important rules is, before handling your snake, make sure you wash your hands. And it doesn't matter if you haven't touched their food, like rodents, rats, wash your hands anyway. You don't want any chance for them to mistake your hand as prey because they find a particular scent on your hands. Also, when it comes to feeding, only handle your snake about 48 hours after they've eaten. You don't want to handle them any earlier than that, because there's a chance of regurgitation, or you could actually damage their internal organs. So just keep in mind, once they've been fed, wait a minimum of 2 days before you handle them. Also, when it comes to snakes and you're trying to work on their handling, lots of snakes are quite head shy. Now, this girl is pretty good when it comes to around her head. She's been handled quite a bit, but you never really want to do that or grab for their head, or really do that under any circumstances when you're working with a new snake and you've just got it. And when it comes to handling, you never really grab them by the head anyway. I just like to do a bit of sort of head desensitization, if you want to put it that way, and just so it's going to reduce them sort of striking. But for the moment, when you're starting to handle your snake, just keep away from the head. Try stick to the middle region and towards the tail when it comes to patting, getting them used to touch. But lots of species of snakes are quite head shy, so probably avoid grabbing them around that head area or putting your hand near their head, because it may freak them out a little bit. Another tip is not to have fast or erratic movements when handling a snake. Move slowly, with purpose, and, steadily move the snake through your hands. Don't rush to grab it. Definitely moving slowly is the best way to go, not to stress these guys out. Also, when handling snakes, try stay calm. If you are super stressed out when you're handling a snake, it is thought that sometimes snakes can actually sense that, and it does make the handling process a little bit more tricky. So yeah, try your best to stay calm. So another tip is, make sure your snake is well supported whilst handling it. You can see with Patch here, I've got both hands, and it's towards the center of her body. So she's feeling quite comfortable, very well supported, and almost imagine yourself like a sturdy tree branch. And that will help when it comes to the handling, for your snake to feel more relaxed and more confident around you. Now, also, don't hold your snake too tightly. So when it comes to handling, I always recommend, again, 2 hands, and you can just loosely sort of support it. You can cup your hands around if you've got sort of more of a flighty snake, but I generally do a lot of open handling with the snakes. And again, they just get a little bit more comfortable. You don't want to grip onto the snake really hard so it can't move through your hands quite smoothly. So again, you know, open hand handling or sort of like a very, very loose grip. Now, when it comes to the tools you may need for your snake, snake hooks are really, really useful, especially when you're getting them out of the enclosures. You don't just want to go reaching with your hand because, again, they could see that as a predator. They're not really sure what's coming in to grab them. So for my snakes, before handling, I always give them a nice touch with the hook so they can feel that sort of coldness. They're not going to mistake like the heat of your hand for food. So that's another thing. The hook's quite good because it doesn't let any heat off like your hand does that they could mistake for prey. So it's a habit for me when I get all of my snakes out, even though none of them are bitey at all, just good practice to use a hook to get them out, and then you can sort of handle them. Don't need to use the hook when they're out of the enclosure if you feel comfortable. But when getting them out of the enclosure, I think using a hook is pretty important. If you've got a bigger snake, these fold-up hooks are pretty much no good. Even for her, she's getting a bit big where this isn't really the best. So if you do have a larger snake, say black-headed or Woma, probably get a fixed hook rather than one of these sort of flimsy collapsible ones. But for children's and Stimpsons, it's generally pretty okay. So now, because this is quite easy to show in this setup, we're actually going to show how to safely get her out. See how I'm not reaching in with my hand? Because she does have the upper advantage being in such a little tight cave. It makes it a bit easier for her to strike. So, and you don't want to rush this. You just want to gently ease her out and see how I've sort of got the midsection of her. And depending on how comfortable you are with your snake, you may want to ease them out even more than that before you do grab them. And again, if you're using one hand in the hook, see how I've got the center of her body, and then you can also use the hook for additional support. Now, another tool that is really just more for you and to build up your confidence and not really for the snake's benefit is if you really are nervous about your snake, if it has had a bit of sort of bitey behavior, let's say, and again, defensive behavior, you can use gloves if that's going to make you feel a little bit more comfortable, but I would recommend using gloves and the hook stool. So you're going to go in with the hook so it associates when it sees the hook, I'm coming out for handling. So the gloves can sort of help you get a little bit more confidence whilst you are starting to handle your snake. Now, another good tip that sort of involves handling, if you do have a new snake, especially the baby snakes, and you're cleaning its enclosure, but you're a little bit nervous and you're cleaning its enclosure whilst it's in there and it keeps sort of striking at you, a really good thing to do is you can either take it out of the enclosure and put it in a container, obviously with air holes for the meantime, or you can actually use a container lid to sort of block the snake off as you're cleaning and it can't actually strike at you. You've got the container lid blocking it. So we used to use this technique a lot with the very large snakes at certain parks. We had a guard, so it was like a plastic almost shield that we could use whilst we were doing stuff in the big snake's enclosure. So you could do that a little bit more simple by just, using a container lid and using that to block the snake whilst you're cleaning in its enclosure. Now, another interesting thing when it comes to handling snakes is the babies in lots of species are renowned for being, for a better term, quite sassy. They can strike quite a bit, so keep that in mind. Even children's, who are some of the best handling snakes, and Stimpsons, pythons, and pretty much all the Antaresias, they're very, very good when it comes to handling. All the babies that I've had and lots of breeders that I know as well, they do get quite striky, and if you come close, they will strike. So we're going to go over how to actually, handle baby snakes and the behaviors you're going to see as well with baby snakes. They are going to be a little bit more flighty, maybe a little bit more tricky. So we're going to go over some things of how to safely handle those guys. So here we've got baby Frankie, and I'm actually looking after this guy for a customer. And this is a baby children's python. Absolute cutie, but you're gonna see sassy. So you can see it strike as I tried to get it out. And striking again, but really good to always hold it over sort of a surface that isn't too high, because if it does strike and falls off. Now see how sassy it is when I'm cleaning the enclosure out too, striking and striking again from that hide that I've taken out the enclosure. Now what I'm doing is when I'm picking Frankie up here, I'm actually distracting it with my other hand that was out of view, so I could pick it up from behind, and it's so focused on the hand that was in front, it sort of let me pick it up. So it's always good to use your other hand as a bit of a distraction. Keep it a bit of a distance away so it doesn't actually get you. But you can see I'm working with Frankie now. I'm getting Frankie to move through my hands, again, slow movements, and you can see how much Frankie has just calmed down with just doing the basic snake handling. So sort of not having erratic movements, loose grip, letting Frankie explore around, staying quite calm. And yeah, Frankie is doing quite well from being a big diva right at the start to now being super chilled. Now before you put your snake back in the enclosure, you want to make sure it's super chilled, it stops striking, you know, it's not having erratic, speedy movements anymore. And then once it's really relaxed, then you can put it back in the enclosure. If you sort of get it out, it gets super bitey, and because of that you put it back in the enclosure, it'll learn that, hey, if I bite or if I strike or be super sassy, you're just going to put me back in the enclosure and leave me by myself, so I'll just do that. Now another thing you do need to keep in mind whilst having snakes and you are trying to handle them, and again it may not happen but it's always good to know what to do when it does happen, is what do you do when your snake actually bites you, latches on and it's not letting go. Now when a snake does bite you, our normal reaction is to pull something off when it's biting you. Don't do that. I must stress, don't pull it off. You could rip teeth out and injure the snake. Yeah, you'll hurt and it's going to be sore. However, you could do a lot of damage to your snake because their teeth sort of go backwards and it could rip their teeth out, but also it's going to injure you more. It'll just, you know, rip your flesh, especially if you've got a big snake. Children's pythons, it's more just little sort of pinpricks, but bigger snakes, you do need to keep that in mind, so don't pull them off. The ways that I have always done it, if there's a risk of getting bitten by a snake, and we're talking about pythons, not venomous snakes, is that if you do have a somewhat snake that has a lot of defensive behaviours potentially going to bite you, get a bucket or container of water, have that near where you're handling, and then if the snake does latch on, just submerge whatever it's bitten onto you, submerge it underneath the water, and it'll eventually have to let go to breathe. You can also run it under the tap. That may help also. I have heard some people will use a spray bottle with water and vinegar. For me personally, I don't do that method because it could cause quite a lot of discomfort. You know, I could just imagine me being sprayed with vinegar in my mouth and near my eyes. It's not going to be the best. So always probably go for the water option first. If you do have particular species that will not phase, they'll stay latched on for ages, you may have to consider other alternatives like that vinegar option. But for me personally, I'll just use the bucket or container of water. You can dunk your hand in and they will eventually let go. So just stay calm whilst you're going through that whole process. When they generally bite, they'll wrap their whole bodies around, naturally constrict. But again, they generally will let go in a couple minutes once submerged in that water, maybe less. For me personally, when all my snakes have had a little nip, and that's very rare, only 2 of them have ever done that, and that's when they're babies. They've just sort of striked to let go straight away. But just keep that in mind. Have a plan. If they do potentially bite you, what are you going to do? Have everything that you need near you. And yeah, again, the main rule is try to stay as calm as you can. Don't just do your reflexes and try to rip it off. It'll do more damage to you and your snake. So lastly, I'll just put a list up of pretty much everything you need to keep in mind whilst handling. You can screenshot all these good little tips and tricks. And yeah, I think it's just really important to know before you start handling your snake, and maybe start incorrectly handling your snake, which could lead to a lot more defensive behaviours coming out. So yeah, we'll put a list up on there for you. Write it down, screenshot it, do whatever you need to do. So thank you so much guys for watching this video. I hope all these little tips and tricks has really helped you out. And thank you so much to beautiful Patch, she's done an amazing job. And if you did like the video, found it useful, please hit the thumbs up, hit subscribe if you want to see more future content, and we'll see you next time. Bye guys.